history and ecology and agriculture and the environment and those kinds of things. Again, I'm a member of the Missouri chapter. And I got interested in, I want to introduce my wife Becky right here in front also. Becky's a retired dental hygienist and part-time, still does some when they call from the old office. They pay her, or I go in and fix the equipment, and they don't pay me. I'm waiting on my first check. So we're having lots of fun in retirement, and we're on our way to Atlanta for the birth of our second grandchild, which will happen on Friday. It'll be a C-section at Whitney. Our daughter is going to have another baby, and we don't know whether it's a boy or a girl. So that's all you need to know. So I'm going to try to see how fast I can do this just for fun. This is a map that I came across at the Missouri Historical Society. It was done by the Missouri Highway Department in the 1940s. And it shows literally all of the trails, tried to show all the trails and names them. It's a very interesting map. I'd never seen it before. I don't know whether, I sent Dolores a copy of it, I believe. Anyway, obviously Native Americans have been in Missouri for a long time. Prior to, I think, the date on the thing was supposed to be back in the 1700s. Come on in. So I'm going to start my story at Sycamore Shoals with Dragging Canoe. And I'm going to skip a couple of things, but everybody's familiar with the story of Dragging Canoe and how Kentucky was going to be a dark and bloody land. And he left with his group of warriors back to the Chickamauga Creek area, and from there carried on the war after 1775, clear up through 1794. So the last battle was at Muscle Shoals, and there are a lot of people there that are very familiar with Muscle Shoals, much more so than I am. And after that selling of that large Cherokee land, if you give me a high sign, Dragging Canoe and his group declared that they weren't just going to give it away, that there would be more, and they would struggle. But some of the other groups began immediately after that to move into the Trans-Mississippi West. And so here's a picture of a part of a map, and I'm going to be referring to this map off and on all morning. And it is an Anthony Finley map from 1826. It's a wonderful resource for Indian removal, Missouri history, the Arkansas Territory, Oklahoma history, and interestingly, Native American history. And I'll be showing you different pieces of that. Here's the military road. Again, this is an 1826 map. So here's a military road that you fellows referred to on the boat yesterday. And here's Memphis, and I refer to Memphis as the trailhead, the ancient trailhead to the Trans-Mississippi West. How do you like that? So what are the Chickasaw Bluffs? Have they been mentioned a couple of times while we're here? And so here's a real map of them, sort of. And by the way, I'll note that Chickasaw Bluffs refers to 4 bluffs, but each bluff is referred to as the first bluffs, the second bluffs, the third bluffs, and the fourth bluffs. I've looked at that, and different people call them different things. Have you ever heard the terminology?
Yes.
The fourth bluffs? Okay. So here we are at Memphis at the fourth bluff, and of course here's Wolf River that you've heard about off and on over a long period of time. This lays out for you the degrees of north latitude. And so Memphis falls at 35 degrees 15 minutes north, and the first bluff is at about 36 degrees. So along comes General Wilkinson, who was commander-in-chief of the military at the time and was stationed in St. Louis at this point, but later much further south, adjacent to New Spain. And he proceeds to make a proclamation on July the 8th of 1806, Now know ye that the circumstances of a considerable portion of the district of New Madrid, which is what Arkansas was in, requiring for the distribution of justice, the prevention of crimes, and the execution of process, a division thereof I do erect, and lay out all that part of the territory of Louisiana into a new and separate district, to be known and called the District of Arkansas, which lies and is situated to the south of the line following, to wit, beginning opposite to the first bluffs on the Mississippi above Wolf River, the first bluffs, 36 degrees. And running thence west to the river St. Francis, then up the same to the Great Island, and from thence due west to the national boundary, sometimes referred to as the boundary of the purchase. And so Arkansas, as we know it, later the north boundary, was laid out as early as 1806 by James Lewis. And so there's the first bluffs at 36 degrees. Any questions about that?
Holden did that. Holden pencil for a pillow.
You like that? At Fulton. Very good, thank you. There's a wonderful series of books, Early Western Travels, by Reuben Thwaites. And if you want a description of the Chickasaw Bluffs as you pass them on the river, I suggest that you get Cummings' Tour to the Western Country. There's 4 or 5 pages in there that describe what the bluffs look like, some historical information about them. So this was all about the transition from France to Spain, Spain to France, and then France to the United States of the Louisiana Territory. And there was a line, historical line, that had been established as the division between New Spain and the United States based on the previous line with France, and that line was that it starts at the mouth of the Sabine River into the Gulf of Mexico. It runs north to the 32nd degree latitude, then due north from there to the southern bank of the Red River, and then follows that southern bank all the way to the 100th parallel. Then north on that 100th parallel to the Arkansas River, and follows the Arkansas River out to the 42nd parallel. And so as we go through the next set of maps, look at how that is attempted to be found. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to figure out initially where that line was. So here our friend General Wilkerson again. And he has a fellow that works for him named Pike. And here's an order to Pike. It is an object of much interest with the executive to ascertain the direction, extent, and navigation of the Arkansas and Red Rivers. As far, therefore, as may be compatible with these instructions and practicable to the means you may command, I wish you to carry your views to those subjects, and should circumstances conspire to favor the enterprise, that you may detach a party with a few Osage to descend the Arkansas under the orders of Lieutenant Wilkerson. So he's after getting a good detailed map of the Arkansas. Properly instructed and equipped to take the courses and distances, to remark on the soil, timber, etc., and to note tributary streams. This party will, after reaching our post on the Arkansas, descend to Fort Adams and there await further orders. And you, yourself, may descend the Red River, accompanied by a party of the most respectable Comanches to the post, and there receive further orders. So he split up the detachment. He wants his son, the lieutenant, to go down the Arkansas River and chart it, and he wants Zebulon Pike to chart the Red River, which had not been charted. And I'm going to blow through these in the sake of time. This is the first of Zebulon Pike's maps. The inset is going to be the next picture. So here we are at the Sabine in the Gulf of Mexico. And what we see very quickly here is that there's an old road that runs into Old Mexico, or into New Spain. That road was of considerable importance to the Spanish authorities. They were concerned about military action that might come down that road. They had a cantonment of 300 men. So we're going to go on. And so here's the next picture of Zebulon Pike's second map. The Osage is shown there because he went up the Osage. Our farm is in Miller County, Missouri, about 6 miles from the Osage. And there's a Pike's camp right there at Wardsville where he camped. He mentioned the large cavern that was there at the mouth of the big tavern. And so the term cavern and tavern had run together in Indian Osage language. Anyway, it's quite a historic area. So now we're going to look at this box on the next slide, and there's the box. And there's a better picture of the road. A very interesting subject is what about the Great Raft? And the Great Raft explains why they didn't go up the river in a boat. It's 100 miles of crossed timbers inside there that exist today. And so Pike gets all the way up to the 42nd. Parallel what he thinks is the head of the, I thought I was going to have a picture of, okay, we'll go on. And then comes the inferences that were made about Pike and about Wilkinson, and the long and short of it is that he gets over in the Rio Grande watershed, which was of course owned by New Spain. He gets taken hostage, ends up in Mexico, ends up returned. The Spanish cavalry are sent out after him. And this little line, actually, the social cultural nature of these maps is much more of a story than the topography that you see. This is the line that the Spanish cavalry was sent out after Pike. And if you look closely, you're not going to be able to see it, but I'll tell you that they turned at the 100th parallel. So they knew where that was, and they knew not to cross it. Okay, so there's our friend Pike. And he's asked to write a report, so he does. And he's talking about the vast plains that he runs into at the foothills of the mountains. The vast plains of the Western Hemisphere may become in time as celebrated as the sandy deserts of Africa, for I saw in my route in various places tracks of many leagues where the wind had thrown up the sand in all fanciful forms of the ocean's rolling waves, and on which not a speck of vegetable matter existed. But from these immense prairies may arise one great advantage to the United States. Quote, the restriction of our population to some certain limit, and thereby a continuation of the Union. Pike's argument is that, number one, he found a desert in the foothills. Number two, he's making the best he can out of it by saying, if the country gets too large, we won't be able to manage it, we won't be able to govern it. A very interesting notion. It's something, he was looking for something good about what he found. So that's the best he can do. So here's Anthony Finley's 1826 map. You can see that map on the internet. I have a copy of it down there. And thanks to Becky's father, I actually own an original of it from 1826, which is what got me started on this whole venture. We will study the whole notion, but this is done in the French manner of the way the maps were done. Finley was known for his accuracy, and he produced an atlas that this map was contained in 1826, and it showed very accurately all the counties of all the states that were displayed in there. Finley, very little is known about Anthony Finley. He's sort of gone in history, unlike some of the other people you're going to hear about this morning. But we will be referring to this map, and I'll let it go with that. Okay, so here we are after 1800, and we've still got people coming in, the Cherokee coming in across at Memphis. They are entering the St. Francis watershed and actually going north as far up as well up into Missouri at that time. And we've got some opposing issues over here, the Osage Indians. And as early as 1800, there were wars going on between the Cherokee and the Osage. Thomas Jefferson, Becky and I are from Jefferson City. And so this was a letter to the Cherokee Nation in 1809. My children, I understand from the speeches which you have delivered me that there is a difference of disposition among the people of your nation, some of them desiring to remain on their lands to betake themselves to agriculture and the industrious occupations of civilized life, while others retaining their attachment to the hunter life and having little game on their present land are desirous to remove from across the Mississippi to some vacant lands of the United States where game is abundant. The United States, my children, are the friends of both parties, and as far as can reasonably be asked, they will be willing to satisfy the wishes of both. Those who remain may be assured of our patronage, our aid, and our good neighborhood. Those who wish to remove are permitted to, and send an exploring party to reconnoiter the country on the waters of the Arkansas and White Rivers. And the higher up the better, as they will be no longer unapproached by our settlers, which will begin in the mouths of those rivers. When this party shall have found a tract of country suiting the immigrants and not claimed by other Indians, we will arrange with them and you the exchange of that for a portion of the country they leave, every aid towards their removal, and what will be necessary for them there will then be fully administered. So as early as 1809, President Jefferson was talking to the Cherokee about moving west. And so here's the blue arrow indicating Cherokee moving in. Here are the white people who are beginning to move in. We still have the Osage problem, and I'm showing the Arkansas River and the White River. Skip this long ordeal in the sake of time. General Clark was, of course, of Lewis and Clark fame. At different times was governor of the territory of Missouri. Was a candidate to be governor, the first governor of the state of Missouri in 1820 when I won. Was the chief Indian agent for the Trans-Mississippi West. And in 1808, he led a group of 600 men, including he was with Boone, Nathan Boone and others, to a little location that he had found that he called Fire Prairie, that the natives had called Fire Prairie, up toward Kansas City on the Missouri River. And with those troops, he rode overland on a couple of the roads that you're going to see pictures of in just a minute, and the bulk of the troops were sent by boat. When everything was assembled up there, he sent the men out and brought in as many of the Osage Nation as he could, including Pawhuska and other chiefs. And he treated with them and for a pittance removed them with their signatures, removed them from 50,000 square miles. There was our homestead in 1808. So they were moved west of that line, and I think I've got a picture of that. No, I don't. So there's on all of the historic maps, the two that are on the floor here, this line right here is the Osage boundary line, which was established in 1808. And so part of that notion is that he removed some of the problem with the Cherokee in the Arkansas region. John Bradbury, and it's a relatively important notion, but I'm going to skip it also in the notion of time. John Bradbury was an Englishman from Manchester, Liverpool. He was a botanist. He was sent over here to encourage cotton planting in Arkansas and Missouri. He was supported by the cotton mills in Manchester and Liverpool. He had visited with Jefferson, had letters of introduction from important people in England, and did a tour of the Missouri River. Along with him was a fellow named Thomas Nuttall, who you will meet in a minute. Bradbury kept a journal and returned from a successful trip with Manuel Lisa and a TOTA or two up the Missouri River. Kept a journal, sent back samples of his plants that he had collected. And he was heading for New Orleans on that particular day when the earthquake struck. And so one of the best descriptions of what happened on the Mississippi River at the day the earthquake struck, which was December 16th of 1811, you can read in Bradbury's journal. And there is how it's listed. It's volume 5 of Waite's Western Travels. It's a really neat read. So I'm back to Anthony Finley, and I'm not very good at this. I'm showing the region of the earthquake, and the fact that the Cherokee, who had loved what they had found in the St. Francis watershed in the Trans-Mississippi West, right there was very good hunting, mild climate, even up into Missouri, up to Cape, and in those regions, were destroyed and affected by that earthquake and the following 200 earthquakes that occurred after that. So they began to move inland. The lovely purchase occurred in 1816 and attempted to move the Osage up into Kansas. Major Stephen Long is also recorded in Thwaites, but his book is available otherwise. He led an expedition from Pittsburgh to the Rocky Mountains in 1819 and 1820. He was supposed to go out and kick the British out of those upper Missouri regions and push them back into Canada. They were continuing their fur trade on the upper Missouri as far up as the Great Bend and on past it. He had 6 steamboats with him, plus he was on the steamboat, the second steamboat that actually went up to Missouri. He got to Council Bluffs the first winter, went overland back to Washington, D.C. President Monroe changed his orders, sent him up the Platte River with 53 men on horseback. And the reason for the change was because Monroe was in negotiation with Spain over our southern and southwestern border. And so he was trying, the president was trying to get an accurate feel for where the 100th meridian was and what the Red River looked like and where it actually lay. Major Long was a topographical engineer, the best of the best. And so he got to spend time out there. You've heard of Long's Peak, that's named for him. He had a group of 3 men with him who were the first men to actually climb Pikes Peak. And so I refer again to you to the account of the expedition from Pittsburgh to Rocky Mountains if you want to learn some history that I've just described. In his record, he says, the St. Francis River rises in the highlands about 100 miles to the westward of St. Genevieve in Missouri, well up into Missouri, and receiving before it leaves the hills Bear Creek, Castor, Whitewater, and numerous other streams, it descends toward the southeast, soon entering the extensive swamp, which stretches from New Madrid on the Mississippi along the base of the mountains to the Arkansas River. We have been informed by some of the inhabitants of the counties of Cape Girardeau and Madison that in this swamp of the St. Francis is so much obstructed with rafts and so lost among islands that its course can be little traced. It is well known that the lower part of the course, it is so obstructed by a large raft, again the use of the word raft, as not to admit the passage of the smallest boats. Its confluence with the Mississippi is about 305 miles below the Ohio and 80 above the mouth of the White River, running parallel both to the Mississippi and the White Rivers, and at no great distance from either. The St. Francis can have no very large tributaries. Indeed, we know of none on either side which deserve the name river. We have no definite information respecting the great swamp in which the St. Francis is said to lose itself soon after leaving the hills. The accounts of hunters and of some of the settlers who have seen it agree in representing it as almost impassable, covered with heavy forest and cypress swamp. The reality is that it was 100 miles, 80 to 100 miles of tangled timber in 4 or 5 feet of muddy swamp. And so by the time of his return from Fort Smith to St. Genevieve or Cape, wherever he was going to meet his steamboat, he had become very familiar with the St. Francis Swamp, which explains why the Cherokee went into Missouri, across back to Anthony Finley's map. So here we are with the Cherokee Treaty of 1817. And if you look closely at Finley's map, and we'll show you a better picture of this in just a minute, Finley actually has on his 1826 map the 1817 removal line. Little Rock, I'm sorry, Fort Smith was formed, laid out in 1817 by none other than Stephen Long. So he had been there before. So by 1819, there was a $5 million acre swap for 3 million acres in Arkansas, and that occurred prior to 1819. I haven't had a chance to look at the significance of that, but I'm going to. So the yellow is the heart of Cherokee land at that time, between the White River and the Arkansas River. And there's Finley's map blown up for you. And it says Cherokee boundary line. This is point remove, and it doesn't refer to removal. It refers to removal of material at that point. But anyway, point remove up to Hardin's Bluff or Batesville. And here's the 1819 line starting just, as I recall, just west of Fort Smith. And so here's the White River, and here's the Arkansas River. Here's the White Nation. Very a fascinating map, and I'm convinced, having read all of this information that I can get my hands on, that Anthony Finley used Thomas Nuttall's journal to draw his map. So let's hear what Thomas Nuttall said. By the way, he couldn't swim. He was with Bradbury in 1809 going up the Missouri. He would have to hang on to the back of Bradbury, and Bradbury would swim back and forth across the Missouri River and across the creeks. Nuttall was a much younger man, but couldn't swim. Had I solely consulted my own gratification, the present volume probably would never have been offered to the public, but as it may contain some physical remarks connected with the history of the country and with that of the unfortunate Aborigines who are so rapidly dwindling into oblivion and whose fate may, in succeeding generations, excite a curiosity and compassion denied them by the President. So he was sensitive to the Native American issues. The Aboriginal languages of America, hitherto so neglected and unjustly consigned to oblivion as the useless relics of barbarism, are nevertheless perhaps destined to create a new era of history of primitive language. I believe I just heard Brett say that Natchez language was gone. In their mazes is enfolded a history of morals, of remote connections, of vicissitudes and immigrations, which had escaped the circumstantial pen of history, and yet, however strange it may appear, are more durably impressed than if engravers upon tablets of brass and possessed of an intrinsic veracity, nothing short of inspiration. He was torn, and it was his intention, I think, when he headed up the Arkansas River to record what he could about the Cherokee. And that's what we got from Finley's map. You can get another view of the Chickasaw Bluffs from chapters 4 and 5 in Nuttall's journal. 4 and 5 in Nuttall's journal. John Mellish was a Scotsman from Glasgow, had been involved and had watched the trade, particularly the cotton trade and the development of the Industrial Revolution in that country, was interested in becoming a wealthy man, made 4 trips to the United States from 1806 to 1811, became very interested in very impressed with everything he saw about the country. It was so opposite to everything that he dealt with in his homeland, the oppression and the slave issues, the serf nobility issues that hadn't really left. He was as opposed to the Malthusian theorems of population outrunning food supply as anybody. He was very much an optimist, a realist, and also a cartographer and topographer and a writer. He engaged with Jefferson on lots of topics. And he left this with us. John Mellish, awestruck with the extent and potential of the arable land in the Mississippi River Valley and westward, falls back on his religion to declare his Indian policy. The Indians are certainly entitled to their fair portion of the country according to their numbers. But let it be remembered that, quote, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, unquote, and that it is the duty of a man to, quote, subdue it, unquote, and to, quote, be fruitful and multiply and replenish it. From the policy heretofore pursued by the United States, we may be very certain that the Indian rights will be duly regarded. But it certainly never was intended by Providence that 200 or 300 men should claim and hold waste a space capable of supporting millions. The right which man has to appropriate any portion of the earth to his exclusive use arises entirely from his having expended labor in its improvement. As population and power overspread the land, the Indians must of necessity betake themselves to agriculture and gratuitous industry. It is the interest of both white and red children that it should be so, and this doctrine cannot be too frequently or too strongly enforced. Well, I really wanted to get in much more into the culture and not so much into the paperwork, but you can tell even the realists of the day, the rationalists, the people, the enlightened ones, the people who were looking at marketing and social order and democracy. Mellish himself fell on the notion that the Indians needed to be somehow or other controlled, or the land should be taken away. John Mellish's 1816 map was the first map to show the continental United States. He guessed at all these over here. He had no idea where any of that was. He guessed at the 100th meridian. It doesn't, I mean, all of this was his expectation of what the country might look like and how rich and arable it was, and how we would, as a nation, never run out of land, and we would never fall victim to hunger. This map preceded any notions of manifest destiny by 40 years that prompted its establishment. July 5th, 1819, the Arkansas Territory was laid off by Congress, and it follows the same line that Wilkinson used in 1806. Major Stephen Long was a topographical engineer. This map appeared in Matthew Carey's 1822 Atlas. Matthew Carey was America's preeminent. He was our first and best cartographer in his Philadelphia shop. This map and the information on it came from Stephen Long's expedition, and the travel logs were not published until 1823 under the name of the Elias James version of the Stephen Long expedition. So Matthew Carey somehow or other got a hold of the information and published this map in 1822. And the reason I've circled what I've circled is because, again, what they're trying to show is here the Arkansas River, here the 100th meridian, and here the Red River. So there's also a lot of writing on here, including Great Desert. And that's the insert and notice the Great Desert notion there. And here's a comment from Major Long about what he found out there. Quote, "We attach some importance to this rocky traverse as the only spot in a distance of 600 miles we can hope to identify by description." In other words, it's very difficult to figure out where they are because everything looks the same. Looks like a desert. In ascending, when the traveler arrives at this point, he has little to expect beyond but sandy waste and thirsty and hospitable steppes. The skirts of the hilly and wooded region extend to a distance of 50 or 60 miles above, but even this district is indifferently supplied with water. Beyond commences the wide sandy desert stretching westward to the base of the Rocky Mountains. We have little apprehension of giving too unfavorable an account of this portion of the country. Though the soil is in some places fertile, the want of timber, of navigable streams, and of water for the necessities of life render it an unfit residence for any but a nomad population. The traveler who shall at any time have traversed its desolate sands will, we think, join us in the wish that this region may forever remain the unmolested haunt of the native hunter, the bison, the prairie wolf, and the marmot. It's 400 by 400 mile region of the short grass prairie plains at the foothills, the eastern foothills of the Rocky Mountains. And folks, the last two quotes that I gave you about from Pike and from Long are the reason that this became Indian territory. It was not good for anything else. So Long's map gets integrated into the next 1823 atlas, and we try to do better and better with this southwestern border. And the big picture is, we got the Louisiana Purchase done. We got the land. We didn't know what we had. We need to look at what it looked like. We need to graph it. We need to do what we can to understand it. We need to be involved with Spain and protect our land and our citizens. And what we found out was trying to find these maps and lay things out, we found out that what we got very far west of there wasn't any good. By the way, the 100th meridian wasn't accurately located until 1930. This is from the same 1822 Carey and Lee journal. This is a map that Stephen Long created. It was drawn in Carey and Lee's Philadelphia office. Missouri became a state in 1820, was elected to statehood in 1821, and so this map was produced from the information that was available at that time. Wasn't published until 1822. This is the best map of Missouri statehood. It shows all 15 counties. It is Missouri's best map of statehood. We're coming up on our bicentennial in 2021, and so I expect to see a lot of this map. We'll see if that's true. And you blow that map up, you see, sort of scribbled in a funny way, Ozark Mountains. And I mentioned Major Long's return across the Ozarks up to his steamboat at Cape. And in so doing, he writes a description of what he finds and the drainages off of this nondescript, previously unknown mountain range, which was debatable at the time. And so he describes in his book, which didn't come out until 1823, all of these that fall, rivers that fall off to the southeast, all of the main rivers that fall off to the northwest and the west and the south, and all these different, and he's falling back on President Jefferson's notion, along with the American Philosophical Society, of the pyramidal height of land. And so he makes an argument by describing the drainages and the directions that they fall, that indeed he's going across a mountain range. And then perhaps because he heard of the name, the term Ozark has been argued for years, he chooses the name Ozark Mountains and finally says, I call these the Ozark Mountains. So this map names the Ozark Mountains, and was confirmed in 1823 when Elias James's version came out. We're going to switch over to the Choctaw for just a minute, and I've lost track of time, but very quickly we're going to describe the Oak Stand Treaty in 1820, which was based on Point Remove to the mouth of Spring River, where it enters the Red River, as the first stab at that process. And of course, Push Mataha was visiting with Andrew Jackson, and we all just heard some of that. And so Push said this to General Jackson about that treaty. He said, General Jackson represents the country he wishes to exchange as being a very extensive country of tall trees, many water courses, rich lands, and high grass, abounding in games of all kinds, buffalo, bear, elk, beavers, deer, turkey, honey, and fruits of many kinds. I am also acquainted with that country. I have hunted there often, have chased the Comanche and Wichita over those endless plains, and they too have sometimes chased me there. I know the country well. It is indeed a very extensive land. The lower portion of the land you propose to swap to us is pretty good country. It is true that as high up the Arkansas River as Fort Smith, the lands are good and timber and water plenty. But a vast amount of it is poor and sterile, trackless, and sandy deserts, new to vegetation of any kind. As to tall trees, there is no timber anywhere except on the bottomlands, and it is low and brushy even there. The grass is everywhere short. As for game, it is not plenty. There are but few beaver, and fruit and honey is a rare thing. The bottoms on the river are generally good soil, but liable to inundation during the spring season. In summer, the rivers and creeks dry up and become so salty that water is unfit for use. It is not, at these times, always salty, but often bitter, and will purge a man like medicine. Were you upset about that?
Don't drink water.
Push Mataha in 1820 knew what he was getting. Don't you think the Cherokee knew what they were facing? And what do you suppose happened next? they moved the eastern boundary line directly under Fort Smith. And so we'll go to the next one. And what's this say? Choctaw boundary. So they were moved completely west of Fort Smith. That's on Anthony Finney's map. Everybody agree with that? John, is that right? I heard some things yesterday made me think that wasn't right. That the Choctaw was the basis of the notion of the Trail of Tears. Did somebody say that somebody else was removed first? Anyway, this came out of good literature someplace. And here's the Choctaw. And so, by treaty, not by an act of Congress, but by treaty, the western boundary of Arkansas shall be, and the same is hereby defined, a line shall be run commencing on Red River at the point where the eastern Choctaw line strikes, which is on a parallel line due south of Fort Smith, actually 100 paces west of Fort Smith, down to the Red River. At the point where the eastern Choctaw line strikes the said river and run due north with said line to the River Arkansas, thence in a direct line to the southwest corner of Missouri. It was never contested in court. It was a treaty. And it defined, it removed the Indians from all of Arkansas into what was left of the Arkansas, well, into new land over here, whatever they called it at the time, and established for all time the western border of the state of Arkansas. It was never passed by the Congress, and it stood today, establishing a state border with a treaty. We're going to switch to Missouri now that we know where they ended up in Oklahoma and why, and we're going to talk about. Again, this is Anthony Finley's map. Yes, and there were 5 in 1826, just 5 roads described on there. Owens Trace is the road, along with the Osage Trace, that William Clark took on his way up to Fire Prairie or Fort Osage. The Salt River Road goes up to Louisiana and up that direction. Some very rich agriculture up in this location. The oldest roads in the state were to the mines, lead mines that had been established by the French way back in the 1700s. And of course, El Camino Real ran along the river and was established by the Spanish as a communication route. That's 1826. Then, do a TOTA, and you all can read that as easy as I can read it. That was in 1835, but I do have something interesting for you to know. In 1836 U.S. Senate Committee report, quote, this is from the United States Senate Committee. The report of the United States Senate Committee on Indian Affairs justified its policy of removing Indians to territory west of the Mississippi by boldly stating, quote, they are on the outside of us and in a place which will forever remain on the outside. So as late as 1836, the Congress of the United States and the Senate was declaring that what they did was appropriate. Here, as I can tell, there were 36 treaties that were established with the Cherokee to remove them of all their land. And so here we are back trying to get from the homeland across Missouri, because we couldn't get across at Memphis because this was 100 miles of swamp. So they came in through Cape Girardeau, Jackson area, across ferries that were established. And the roads that existed at the time were not across the Ozark Dome. They were roads that existed along the rivers where merchandise and mercantile businesses had been established. There were no significant roads across the Ozark Dome, and so they had to go around the dome and went way up as far north as Rolla, Missouri. This is David Burr's 1839 map, and it shows some of those roads. I apologize for the detail here, but we can get to Jeremiah Greenleaf's map of 1840, and you see sort of a similar pattern where there are many more roads on the east side of the state and along the Missouri River where merchandise had been flowing. There was a significant road at the time called the St. Louis to Springfield Road.
Yes.
Which falls down into Arkansas. Is that same road as the Wire Road that you talk about?
Yes.
And so this map has become important several different times, including at the Snelson Brinker House, where we use this map to get that site located along with the use of the diaries. And another resource that we're attempting to use is the Geodetic Survey, original land survey maps, and that map you saw a similar picture of in Arkansas yesterday, I believe. And so each township, range, and section has information available. Dolores tells me that after a certain year, roads that the surveyors found on the western side of the state were recorded. So we're going to be using that information along with the diaries and what other information we can come up with, including from USGS, as Missouri tries to find more and more certified sites. This is This is, I got a KMZ, several of us in Missouri received a KMZ from National Trails. Anyway, the long and short of it is that these maps are Missouri Highway Department county maps. And they are geo-referenced inside the agency. So I took the KMZ to the Missouri State Highway Department. They were kind enough to lay the KMCs on the county maps. And I think they generate a very interesting map. If was a little bigger, you would see that all the county roads are described in there. And here's the KMZ with the emblems going across. And so as far as website development and trying to obtain some stewardship with interpretation and developing certified sites and the use of all of that information, we believe in Missouri that those county highway map, county road and highway maps will be a significant source and fairly easily to use. Anybody's pointing to their watch, so I need to shut up. Thanks for listening.